So we'll do that. I'll do that. Okay. We've started the webinar. We are recording, so we're letting people join the room. I always, for those of you that have watched Warwick's virtual events before, you know I always say this. I love opening the webinar because it feels like it's just like opening the doors at the store. It's like, okay, come in, everybody. Come in and come watch us. So I like to welcome Maggie and Renee. Hi, you two.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for
It's
having.
It's so fun to have you both. So while we're letting people get settled in, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping. Um, so for today, Renee and Maggie are going to chat for about 35 minutes. There's a Q and A. I know everybody's used to Zoom and I know everybody knows what's going on, but I have to do my due diligence. There's a Q and A button down at the bottom of your screen. Renee is going to, like I said, chat with Maggie for about 35 minutes, and then she'll open it up to questions from the audience. So go ahead and pop your questions into the Q and A button at the bottom of the screen, and she'll bring those to Maggie when she's done with her conversation. In the chat, I've opened up the chat, so if you want to let us know where you're calling in from, we were just talking weather, what the weather was like where Maggie's at in Indiana and where Renee is like, where the weather's like in Connecticut. A little snow in Connecticut. Actually, temperate weather in Indiana, it seems like. And we're located, Warwick's, for those that don't know, is located, oh, Boston, Mass has got, it's icy. And Carlsbad, Janine, I'm in Carlsbad too. Warwick's is actually located in La Jolla, though, as my sign says, since 1896. We haven't been there since 1896, but we've been in La Jolla since the 30s, so been around for a while. Not the oldest bookstore in the country, but the oldest continuously family owned. So we've been around for a while. So also in the chat, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put how to order BLOB, what we're going to talk about today. Can't wait. You can come to, we'd love for you to come to the store if you're in the San Diego area and pick it up, but we can ship it anywhere in the United States. So go ahead and order that from us if you'd like. So don't forget about asking questions in the Q&A button and ordering the book. So I think we've given everybody a chance to settle in, and I will do my due diligence, which is to introduce these wonderful authors and turn it over to them. So, Maggie Su is a writer and editor. She received a PhD in fiction from University of Cincinnati and an MFA from Indiana University. Her work has appeared in New York England Review, Four-Way Review, Tri-Quarterly Review, Puerto del Sol, Juked, Diagram, and elsewhere. She currently lives in South Bend, Indiana, with her partner, cat, and turtle. I love that you have a turtle, can I just say?
18 years old this year.
Wow. He'll outlive us all, right? Joining Maggie is Renee Branum. Renee has an MFA in creative nonfiction from the University of Montana and an MFA in fiction from the Iowa Writers Workshop, where she was a Truman Capote Fellow. Her work has appeared in the Georgia Review, Narrative Magazine, the Gettysburg Review, Brevity, Alaska Quarterly Review, and Best American Non-Required Reading, among others. She is a recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Prose Fellowship in 2020. She currently lives in Connecticut. So, ladies, have a great conversation, and we'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you.
Hey, Maggie.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are
Good. So excited to have you.
Oh my
Renee's
God.
amazing, and her book, Defenestrate, is really amazing. So I'm just thrilled that you agreed to do the Q&A for this. Thank you so much.
So I wrote up like a whole litany of questions to ask you about Blob. But I think we're probably not going to get through them all in 30 minutes, but we'll see what we get through. Um, but for those of you that don't know, Maggie and I went to the PhD program in University of Cincinnati together. So we have seen each other's work in like many different forms in the process of being in workshop together and like just being good friends and readers for each other and like seeing each other's work grow. So the first time that I encountered Maggie's work was in our very first, my very first fiction workshop at the University of Cincinnati. And she was working on, it was a novel workshop, and she was working on a novel about a girl that like magically gets transformed into a mosquito. Um, and what I love about Maggie is that like I checked up on this draft that she submitted like months later and was like, "Hey, how's it going with this Mosquito Girl novel that you were working on?" And Maggie was very casually like, "Oh yeah, that's like a 2,000 word short story now." Like like I condensed it down to its like most sort of like precious essence. So I think of you, Maggie, as like this sort of mythic master of compression. And in that vein, I wanted to start conversation off asking you about the early stages of Blob. And at what point did you know that Blob was going to be a large scale project? So, how do you recognize when an idea is going to be a flash fiction piece versus a full length novel? And how does that manifest for you?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I cannibalized that novel for that very short story, which was in four-way review. Um, I think I had to write a novel, I felt. I felt an urgency around it, I think, because of the dissertation and also because I love reading novels. I love the expansiveness that novels allow for. Blob kind of started as I love short stories as well, but Blob started as a 10-page short story. I think you also read it in workshop. Then became a 10-minute play, and then finally became the novel. And I think I just felt like I wasn't done with it. I feel like each iteration of it didn't quite feel right. I think I realized later that I was kind of having a thought experiment in the short stories and in the play. There wasn't like the heart of the novel wasn't there because I hadn't really committed to the characters enough. So the novel was a test for me, and it happened to coincide with the pandemic, which was also a test for me, where I was like, okay, can I really commit to this voice for this many pages? And it was my first time actually completing a novel project as an adult. As a child, I had many NaNoWriMo drafts, but as an adult, I think something about the idea of a woman finding a blob and there being um, this connection between them that kind of is mystical, which is kind of how I feel about all human connections. They're kind of confusing to me, and I don't really understand how people meet and how they have anything to talk about. So I felt like that conceit was a pretty good way for me to kind of get at these questions of connection and love and companionship that I was really invested in thinking about.
Yeah. So in thinking about like blob evolving from just the sort of seed or the like blob that Vi finds in the alleyway, I was really intrigued by something that I actually read in the acknowledgments of Blob, where um, you mentioned working with the brilliant Leah Stewart, your dissertation advisor, in reading this project together and working on it. You mentioned like that she suggested that you go gentler on Vi. And in your treatment of the character, uh, I was sort of thinking about all the different ways that our relationships to our protagonists can morph and change over time through different drafts. So in what ways did your attitudes toward Vi shift during the revision process? And were there any surprising discoveries that you made about that specific character along the way? And how did your rendering of her change from your initial drafts to the final version of her?
Such a good question, and it's so insightful because absolutely, I think um, I have an essay in the is Lit Hub. I almost said them wrong. In Lit Hub, not in the Rumpus, in Lit Hub, where I kind of talk a little bit about also like that specific piece of advice as well, because I think I had this sense, and based on some of the reviews, some people have a sense as well, like that maybe Vi should be punished more, that maybe, she makes all of these mistakes, and she's a very flawed character. And I remember being like, well, maybe there should be, there are certainly consequences for her, and I think the novel is really invested in her messiness in general. And I remember Leah Stewart being saying in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of kind of my own stuff going on, she's like, "You're being really hard on Vi. You're not." I hadn't taken that step back to kind of create that empathy for a character that I think allows growth. I also think that's what the novel form allowed me to do, was kind of say, I have this room. Like I think Chris Batchelder says, we're just going to PhD school again. He was like, in a novel, you can befriend your characters. In a short story, almost never. And I think not befriending Vi, but at least kind of understanding her growth pattern and allowing her that generosity of space is something I didn't expect necessarily. I didn't expect her arc to kind of take that turn, and it kind of mirrored how I was feeling about myself at the time as well. I think we all kind of needed that gentleness and care for ourselves during the pandemic and the ensuing years. And I think it was really important for me to invest in her as a character, despite her unlikability, despite her messiness. And I think a lot about Fleabag season 2, episode 1, um, the dinner scene. I think a lot about that character of Fleabag as well, and the ways in which like the messiness of that character is not shied away from. And so I wanted to allow for that growth in that process. And I think Leah helped unlock something about that character. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like you achieved a really special balance with her. Because yeah, she is difficult, but she's so lovable. And so I've been thinking, my colleague, I teach at Connecticut College, and one of my colleagues last semester taught a class called Problematic Protagonists. And they read Madame Bovary and like lots of classic literature, and there are so many problematic protagonists to think about. Um, but I really love that Vi's problems are sort of what endears us to her, what makes her feel accessible, what makes her feel lovable. I feel like it's very much like a messy package deal where it's all embedded together. So yeah, I'm very team Vi, like really hard. So Leah Stewart had a lot of wisdom to give in achieving the gentle relationship between you and your protagonist.
Yes. Yeah, there wasn't originally supposed to be quite as happy of an spoiler. I don't know if it's a happy ending, but there wasn't originally supposed to be as cathartic of an ending. Um, and I think, yeah. Originally, actually, I was going to switch points of view. I probably talked to you when I was trying to write Bob, and I was like, this is really not working, Renee. This is really hard. And to write this kind of alien point of view that was completely like, had way different themes than the rest of the novel. Um, and I think recognizing that the story is ultimately Vi's was really important to where the book ended up going.
Yeah, well, a happier rival for sure. So in thinking, like we've sort of conjured the presences of our teachers and mentors in this discussion naturally. Um, and so Maggie visited my intro to fiction class a year or so back to talk with my students and answer their like bombardment of questions about writing. They sort of like gently interrogated her. I think I had one student that got really fixated on Vi's like childhood hedgehog pet and was like asking you many questions about that very specific detail when you read from Blob. Um, but thinking about a lot of the words of wisdom that you shared with my students, um, as a student of writing yourself, what's the best advice that you have ever received from a teacher, mentor, or established writer? And when young writers seek out advice about the writing process, what words of wisdom do you find yourself returning to over and over? So
Really good question. I had so much fun during that visit. I think it was my first time reading from
I
Blob.
love you so
And
much.
it was so much fun. Your students were so enthusiastic. They had thousands of questions. I think that really helped me during this whole publicity thing because I'm like, no one's, no questions are scary to me because I've had all these wonderful,
Got grilled
curious
on hedgehog.
students. Um, I think of this one. I've been coming back to it. I think it was my MFA thesis director, Elizabeth Aslami. She told me, and it sounds kind of harsh. I think she told me, no one is ever going to care about your writing as much as you. And I think that stuck with me. I think I was a very like external. I was motivated. I was like a suck up, kind of motivated by getting the straight A's, by like doing all the things right, and realizing that um, no matter what, like at the end of the day, my writing kind of belongs to me and is something that I would do irregardless of whether anyone was reading, really freed me in a lot of ways to say, okay, it sounds harsh, like no one's gonna care about your writing, but I think the realization, especially in the MFA when I was young, I was like 23 entering the MFA, and I thought, I'm gonna have a book by the time I get out of here. I'm gonna like blow up, all these types of things, and realizing that no, even if no one cares, would you still be doing this? Would you still be pursuing this? How do you write something that matters to you and not even if it doesn't resonate with other people? And I think that freed me a little bit. I think the PhD freed me by just being so mind-numbingly long and arduous. And like, there's just something about going through it where now I think like something about the process like sucked the like urgency, not urgency out of me. I'm making, are they here? No, it's all good. Um, I think uh, the process wasn't like I have to get a book out now or I'm going to die. Like I have to get a book out now or I'm a failure. It became how do I write a good book? How do I write a good story? Even if it only pleases myself. And I think that that advice has stuck with me. Yeah, some of Leah's advice about being gentler to the characters, befriending them. And also just keep going. I've seen so many wonderful writers who maybe are kind of driven by the external success, and that's maybe why they um, stop writing. And I think if you lose the joy in reading and you lose the joy in writing, then that's kind of not going to be fun. So it's a very long game, and to not be put off by not having maybe the overnight success that you dreamed of.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I think for me, um, I feel like this feels relevant to your mosquito novel, but I think the most valuable piece of advice I've ever received is like nothing's ever wasted because I think
Hmm.
sometimes when things end up on the cutting room floor and you have to make these difficult decisions, it feels like or even if you show up to do work and you visit the space of your novel, but nothing actually gets like written that day, you were still there and you still like gave yourself to the project. So I feel like that idea of nothing is ever wasted made me sort of rethink the way that I was relating to the time that I was spending with the work I was doing. Um, and it made me sort of reevaluate like, oh, yeah, so much of what I'm producing is useful in figuring out a character or a theme or um, building a bridge to a different part of this project, even though the actual words that I wrote, and I wrote so many don't end up in the final draft. I think that that's been a big struggle for me, and like
Mhm.
thinking about you whittling Mosquito Girl down to 2,000 words makes me think like, oh, Maggie already figured that out like years ago. Like I'm slow to the information of like, yeah, no, all of this has its place and it has its like season, not to be like cornily biblical about it, but
Oh,
yeah.
I love that. And I think what really inspires me about your writing process, I remember you talking about like reading poetry. Like I just feel like everything that you like the way that you like operate in the world is kind of like from this writerly perspective that I find really beautiful. You can like watch a movie and then we can have these really deep conversations. Like I've really enjoyed, I'll never forget like sitting on the porch in your apartment in Cincinnati and just talking about art and writing and films and horror movies and the lake house. We've had um yeah, I just Renfield, another great one. I'm not sure we finished that, but I think it inspires me to see the way that you like move through the world, kind of just absorbing beauty and things to think about and write about. And I've always was jealous of you. I know you're like interested in my distillation. I feel like you're the total opposite. Like you write so expansively. And I think that kind of channeling that for the novel because I get so precious and I had to let go of some of that control. And I think that I mean, it's still not a very long novel. That's why people are like, I read it in one sitting, which makes me feel very happy. I think of your blurb because you were like the one who was like, you slow down, people, which I appreciated. But I think, yeah, I've learned a lot from your way of moving through the world, and I'm just grateful for it.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. Yeah, I feel like it took my partner actually like saying to me, um Maggie's partner and my partner were in the same philosophy program at Cincinnati. That's actually how I met my partner. And as a philosopher, he was expressing to me like, I'm really jealous of the fact that like you can sort of sit down with a movie or a TV show or a book that you're reading for pleasure, and it still is feeding the thing that you love. Like it's still you doing work. And I was like, I am now fully justifying binge watching TV shows that I love. I'm doing narrative research.
Yeah,
But that was like a really freeing thing. And that like when you're talking about sitting on the porch and drinking wine and like that was work. We were doing work. We were doing the
word.
work of being writers, even though like it didn't feel that way, like it felt like we were just having the most fun time possible. Um, but yeah, I think that that opened up for me like, oh yeah, I can chalk this up as productive in a way that I wasn't giving myself permission to do before. So that's that's a valuable takeaway, writers out there. So, on reading this novel for the second time, uh, it sort of struck me upside the head, like in a kind of like, oh, duh way, that like Vi's relationship with Bob actually serves as this really useful metaphor for the creative process, particularly the ways that authors can like exert all this effort in shaping their characters to fit a certain mold or represent a certain idea, and the characters will just keep surprising their creators with all these wills and agendas of their own. So were you consciously thinking of like blob molding as a portrait for the creative process while you were writing? And in what ways does Vi's shaping of Bob parallel your shaping of Blob, a love story, from an amorphous idea into a finished product?
Oh goodness. I wasn't quite, but I like that. I think that's really smart. I was probably thinking a little bit more like just about identity and but I love that idea. I think I was really influenced by like pop culture, obviously, and the effect of kind of the media that Bob consumes on his worldview, for better and worse. And the effect that the media that Vi consumes kind of shaped her. Um, and thinking a lot about, I really wanted to take out the flashbacks. I was like, do not write another flashback, Maggie. Like, I was not going to allow myself to write more flashbacks. And then I kind of realized that they allowed me to think about the way that Vi was shaped and how important that was to um, Bob and Blob and her current situation. I think sometimes flashbacks get like a bad rap because they're the cause and effect. They kind of create this like false like simpleness maybe to the narrative where it's like, okay, that's why she is the way she is because she you know, had some microaggression happen to her or something. But I really wanted it to feel more faceted than that. And I think yeah, the writing process. I think I see like the idea of molding something that you don't quite understand or you think that you have a handle on that kind of um, maybe turns out to be something that you can't control. Also, was thinking a lot about control just in relationships and how impossible it is to really like know another person. I had this, I think for a while I wanted to fully understand another human or to think that I could fully like know everything that was going through someone else's mind. And I think in Vi's relationship with Luke, that's really kind of where she fails, right? She's like, I couldn't see it coming that he was going to leave. I couldn't see it coming, like what I was doing wrong in that relationship. And I think that her desire to control Bob is a lot of like our desire to control like the art output and how people receive our work. And I think it's impossible to know someone fully. It's impossible to read someone's mind. And so once she like lets go of that and recognizes that um the control that she's trying to exert can't can't coexist with empathy and kindness and all of these other things. I think she's the better for it. So maybe, yeah, maybe I mean, in the novel for me, as you know, was a very difficult form because I wanted to control, I wanted to distill, I wanted to have this perfect gem of a thing that couldn't exist, and um, so I was like, I remember saying like it's just gonna be a mess. A lot of people write messy novels. I'm just gonna write a mess of a novel and it'll be okay. Um, yeah, so allowing that messiness in my own writing, I think was really part of the part of the challenge as well.
Is it Anne Lamott that has the quote about the blank page?
I think so.
I say this to my students all the time, and I don't even know who originally said it. I think it's Anne Lamott.
I think you said it. I think it's Renee original.
No, it is not, but thank you, Maggie. But yeah, someone very wise says you can always edit a bad page, but you can never edit a blank page. Um, and yeah, that you have to write it in order to make it better. So is like the sort of basic equation that exists. And sometimes that's hard and scary. I know particularly for my students who all seem to be perfectionists. Like, is this a Gen Z attribute? But but yeah, they're embracing the bad page over the blank page, and I'm proud of them for it,
Yeah.
as we have done, as we
It's
have.
horrible. I think you're better at it than me. I've always hated revision. And then I had a year of revision with Leah, a year of revision with my agent, and 6 months of revision with my editors. So it was like an immersion fear factor.
Oh, I remember. I mean, I think like it's like they say that evolutionarily, like giving birth, you sort of protect yourself from the memory of, sorry, I know I'm not trying, this is not pointed to try and freak you out as like a mother to be.
Yes, 8 months pregnant. No,
Yeah.
that's something else I have to, yeah, fear factor myself. But yeah.
But I do feel like I like erase the part of my brain that like was doing all the hard parts of revision because I'm like, I don't know that I would write another novel if I remembered every detail of like the sort of painful um reevaluation that you have to do with every thought that you had and then wrote down. Um, you go through it. It's so intensive. It's also so generous. I mean, there are people
Yeah.
in the sort of publication process that pay attention to every single letter, every punctuation mark that you placed on the page, and it's like an incredible gift of attention, but it's terrifying at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in that vein, like what was the sort of like most surprising aspect for you of the publication process?
I think it was like how collaborative it was.
Mhm.
I remember, um, so my agent is really amazing, Samantha Shea, and she actually reached out to me in 2017 when I had written a short, really very short story for the offing. And I actually pitched her Mosquito Girl. And then like 2 years later, I pitched her Blob. I've been pitching her things for many years, and eventually she took me on. But I remember when I was trying to decide who to go with, she had just such a clear vision for how she would change things. Like I had some agents who were like, "Let's send it out. It's ready to go." And Samantha was like, "Well, actually, this could be a much the narrative, the arc could be much stronger." And I just remember being so blown away by like her vision and how that could like make all of the themes that I had been trying to get across so much stronger. And I was just, you think of writing as this very solitary thing, and I think for a lot of the time it is. But what surprised me was how much I relied on you, how much I relied on folks in workshop and Leah Stewart and my dissertation committee. There's a lot of things, suggestions you don't take. There's some suggestions you take, but just the like amount that other people's feedback had on shaping the book, I think really did surprise me because I was like, part of me, part of yourself is like, it could be better. And part of me was like, oh, let's just, it's good. It's perfect, guys. Like, let's leave it how it is. Um, so I was surprised at how collaborative it was. I don't know if that was your experience with Defenestrate.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where it's like even after, you go through all of these processes with your agent and your editor and then like the proofreaders have at it and they have all the questions, and they read with such attention and they're like, fact checking. And I'm like, oh wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one last question I'll ask before we open it up to everyone who's here. Um, is there one or maybe a couple works? And it doesn't even have to be a book. It could be a movie or a TV show or a podcast. But are there works that like without which Blob would not exist that are sort of like paving the way for Blob to be in the world in terms of influence?
Yeah. Well, I was lucky enough to have Amy Bender blurb the book. And in my MFA, she was just a huge influence for me getting into like thinking about speculative fiction, thinking about speculative conceits, because she's just a master at using kind of these strange thought experiments to kind of get at something that felt very real to me. Um, and yeah, I think so many Asian American women writers are doing so many weird, exciting things. I'm thinking about Jenny Zhang's short story collection, Sour Heart, how messy those characters are. Thinking about Ling Ma's Severance, I really loved how that like kind of post-apocalyptic novel, the way that it moves narratively so quickly and used that conceit so well. And yeah, she's great at world building. I'm not that great at world building, but I did take some things from her. And I think I mentioned Fleabag. maybe the ending of BoJack Horseman. I wasn't thinking about it when I wrote the final scenes, but I see it now, potentially there being some sort of influence there. Um, I talked a little bit about The Shining in my essay. Not that it I know I think it's not a horror novel. I think it got critiqued for that, which I am kind of thinking a lot about horror recently. But I think the idea of like the human being the scariest thing, like specifically like white men being being terrifying, is kind of part of that and thinking about these parts of the self kind of interplaying with each other. It's kind of how I started to think about The Shining. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, and Kevin Wilson, who was so kind to Blurb as well, his kind of mixture of humor in his work. He read at Cincinnati, and just like I was just so taken by like kind of that deadpan humorous quality where I don't think he's like trying to be like funny, and yet there's something on the page that creates like that interesting juxtaposition. So I was thinking a little bit and reading some of his work as I was working on Blob as well.
Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned that because I feel like humor is such a shaping element in your work. I feel like I've just sort of started to dip a toe into experimenting with humor in my fiction. I feel like I've been writing very serious characters who are having serious problems for a really long time. Um, but I was curious, like, if you ever crack yourself up when you're writing, because just the amount of like laughing out loud I was doing reading Blob made me
Mhm.
be like, was Maggie just sort of like giggling as she was composing this story?
I think there was one, sometimes, yeah, sometimes I just laugh at little details, but I do think there was the scene, where Bob is kind of getting out of the pool. And for some reason, writing that was just a good time for me. I don't know. And I has like the porn star like slow-mo moment and yeah.
One that really got me just like off the top of my head is when Vi's brother Alex is sort of confronting her about not responding appropriately to like a text about her aunt dying and being like, you just texted the crying face emoji to the group chat. And then that like really hit my funny bone. I don't know why. So with that, let's see what questions the audience has for you. Um, so from Sandra Stahl, um, we have this question. Did you ever have writer's block where you had trouble deciding how to take the story forward?
I definitely did. Yeah, I definitely did. I had a very strict kind of outline. And I don't know if anyone's figured this out yet, but I would have 1,000 word scenes, and then each chapter was 3,000 words. And I had this idea of what each scene was going to be. That changed drastically as I was writing it. So I think I got a third of the way through, and I was supposed to switch points of view. And that's kind of when I had to stop and reevaluate what the book was about. Um, but yeah, I think a big thing for me was making sure that I sat down at the desk for 2 hours every day. It was either 2 hours or 500 words. And usually it was 2 hours. But that was kind of, I think, making sure that I touched the project in some way every day when I was in it. Of course, I took a year off of writing to just read for my PhD exams, which I think really helped me kind of create that urgency. And as soon as I finished the exams, I was writing Blob because it had been kind of building in me for that whole year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't really consider what a gift the exams were going to be for the project I was working on, but being forced to read like 100 books in a year, I was like, this is an incredible immersive, like sort of roller coaster of like all the things that I love that are feeding the work that I do. So
Mm.
it was a real like hard, long, hard look in the mirror in a way, was reading for the exams. Yeah. So we have a question here from Sue Cho. What was your favorite scene to write in Blob? Were there any surprising scenes that you didn't foresee that made it into Blob?
Ooh, favorite scene to write? That's a really good question. Um, I think I really liked writing the Elliot dinner party chapter. I really just enjoyed kind of that dynamic and like her being a beard at this party and getting increasingly more drunk. I think it felt like a little short story. Like I was like somehow adding a little short story into my novel, and so that was fun. The scenes that didn't almost didn't Ivan originally was not a character. So all of the Ivan scenes which come later in the novel, were surprising to me. I think the ending also. I originally did end it with the karaoke scene, so we kind of switched. We switched it up. Um, and yeah, I'm really interested in people's reaction to the ending, and how divisive it's kind of been. And I've really like I how people either loved it or hated it, basically. And so that's been really interesting for me, just like not even as someone who wrote it, but just like as like an observer to be like, oh, I don't, yeah, I don't know what to make of that. So that's been surprising and fun. It wasn't the original ending, so it's been interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you was about like having your book out in the world and receiving all these responses to it, what the most surprising thing that uh, a reader or reviewer has said about your book has been. Has it been how divisive people have taken a stance about the ending?
I think so because yeah, I think it has been that. Although, I think I've also just been surprised by the wealth of people who've said that they've read it really quickly, which has made me very happy. I haven't gotten like the criticism that it's been too too academic. I don't think that that's a worry of anyone's. I haven't been accused of, like the MFA fiction or PhD fiction label. Um, but yeah, no, I had to stop reading the Goodreads, as you know. You can't. You
I think
can't.
I need to stop.
Yeah, I know. I had Andrew, my partner Andrew, read, and it just upset. They were like, Maggie, what are people saying? But I truly believe that, of course, this book is not going to be for everyone, and I think that's totally valid and okay. And I want to allow everyone to have their feelings. Even though some of them are very long and mean. Um, yeah. But yeah, it's been wonderful and I've just been overwhelmed and then you kind of feel like so grateful and also like tired. I'm kind of glad I'm doing it this is the same time as I'm so pregnant because it's putting things in perspective for me. It's like, you can't really be too worried about everything that's going on when you're gonna try to push a baby out in a few weeks. So, it's been kind of fun to have that mix. Yeah,
It's very exciting. It's like two babies at once.
I know.
Blob and baby blob. Yeah. So we have a question from Peter Sue. Now that Blob is published, do you feel that you have let it go out into the world, or do you still think about changing it, editing it, and tweaking it?
I'm okay, never engaging with it again. I'm just kidding. Blob. No, yeah, I feel really good about it existing. I think it's been 7 years since like the beginning of the idea till now. And so it feels like, the end of an era in some ways, and it's also the beginning of people reading it. So like that's kind of exciting to have those two. And it is making me be more gentler with my younger self. It's making me think back on the person who wrote this and have a lot of empathy for them. So I'm happy for people to take it over and to not have ownership over it over anymore. I think it helps that I've started the next project, so I can kind of say, this is like a wonderful time capsule of my writing and of a certain time, and I'm really glad that it's reaching people.
Yeah, so when I published my first novel, Defenestrate, which is all about stories about people falling, and after it went out into the world and was finished, I feel like I got so many excellent stories from people that like were like, "Oh, I have this story about falling," and it was almost like I felt this pain of not having been able to like put it in the book. But then I was like, no, the book is facilitating this like other sort of experience of like collecting this lore. And it's okay that the book is complete and like we can move on.
Mm.
Um, but so you mentioned a future project, and Peggy Benson is also curious about it. Can you give us a hint about the next work that you're working on?
I am Peggy. Yeah, oh goodness, I almost abandoned it, as you know that I love to do. But I gave it a reread recently, and I think I'm gonna stick with it. So it's inspired by horror films a little bit more explicitly, um, and kind of my time. So I spent a year living in Athens, Georgia, and during that time, me and my partner Andrew fed feral cats. And I just had this idea. I did some research into cats, and they were particularly black cats. And thinking about like, well, wouldn't it be interesting if like these following these cats kind of gave you a portal into a different world. So that's kind of where it started, and it begins with a character whose sister has disappeared a year ago, and so he gets these messages, these like mysterious messages that just say "feed the cats," and so he kind of has to decipher that and goes on his own kind of journey. He's a philosophy graduate student, so a world that we know a little bit better, and thinking a little bit about like horror and academia, horror and race. So he's half Asian, and his sister who disappeared is white, and thinking a little bit about kind of that relationship. And yeah, this is I'm speaking into the world, so now everyone has to hold me accountable and be like, Maggie, where's that book called Feed the Cats? And if it never comes out, you'll know.
It sounds excellent. I can't wait for Feed the Cats. So we have a question from Emily Koo. Do you have any tips on how to write more consistently and maybe some places that you get inspiration from?
Yeah, I'm not a good person to ask, but I think something that I've learned is just that I think you and you have like really consistent routines. I will have things that work for me for a little bit and then they'll just stop. So I do love writing by hand. I've always loved writing by hand. So I have kind of a notebook where I write, and it frees me from that like perfectionist quality that I think it is can be so hindering when you're trying to get words on the page. In terms of inspiration, this book very much is inspired by kind of my upbringing. There's so many details in there that I'm sure folks from Champaign and Bloomington and maybe Cincinnati could recognize, and see like I get really inspired by like the little grounding details, and I love to kind of pepper them throughout to make the book feel lived in and real to readers. I think um now I'm getting inspiration a lot from film. I've got the two Wong Kar-wai short stories. I really love Wong Kar-wai's films, and I hope to one day I'm actually enjoying just writing um, adaptations, writing these kind of retellings of those films and very, very slowly. So like over the course of years. So I imagine this project going on for a long time. So yeah, I love consuming different media. I love reading. Again, like reading that full year was the way that I was able to write for a full year. So I think if you ever find yourself feeling stuck, returning to the things that make you feel something, that remind you of like what art can do and why you want to write in the first place.
Yeah, I always say reading is the best defense against writer's block. Yeah. So we have a question from Sandra Stahl. What type of revision did you have to make over the 2.5 years before publication?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with my agent, Samantha Shea, we did a lot of structural revision. So a lot of it, she didn't really touch much of the content except for to ask me to expand or add different scenes. It was really about trying to create that arc so that the emotions and the characters could come to a head. I remember specifically the Elliot dinner party scene that I kind of talked about came much earlier in the initial draft. And she moved it because that kind of has a climactic kind of quality to it. It's not the climax of the book, but it has some sort of a feeling that we needed towards the end, more so towards the beginning. She had really great comments for me. After that, yeah, a lot of it is about was kind of this negotiation between like, are these things too niche? Are these things too specific, maybe, to be read by a general audience? And so that was fun. I think there are some that I push back on, and there's some that made a lot of sense. I guess in England, they don't have Bob Evans. So that was something I learned. So it's Denny's now because they know about Denny's over the across the pond. So that was really fun. There was kind of fun things like that. Others where, I felt like something maybe was very clear and they were like, no, write another sentence. And I was like, I don't want to. Um, but then I did. And, usually it helped clarify things and made the book better.
Great. So we've answered all of the audience questions. Um, Thank you all for asking so many insightful and engaging questions.
I know. It was a great conversation. Thanks, Renee. It was really good. Thanks, Maggie. Hope you two
Thank
had fun too.
you too.
So we got to hear from Maggie on what she's working on next. Renee, can you share with us a little bit about what you're working on next?
Well, I'm a little bit worried that this is like turning into like the project that will never get finished, because I've been working on it for a while now. But I'm actually doing research for a nonfiction project that's kind of a cultural history of Bigfoot. So I'm sort of talking about like the modern mythos that is Bigfoot lore and collecting Bigfoot stories. So, if anyone has any good Bigfoot stories that they want to share, please hit me up.
I love it. Well, speaking of hitting you up, where should people go to do that? Do you have favorite social media you like to use or
Instagram is probably the best. It's Damfino, Damfino 1895. That's me.
okay. How about you, Maggie? Is there a way that people can get in touch with you? You're going to be busy in the next few weeks, so may not be dancing a lot of
Yeah,
social
yeah,
media.
I assume everything will go I'll get a lot of sleep, I assume. No, yeah, you can find on Instagram. I'm going to create a website, but I haven't created one yet. It is Lit Mag Reject. It's possible I had a chip on my shoulder at some point. But yeah, you can find me over there on Instagram.
I love that you still kept it.
Many
That
people told me to change it. You know what?
no.
We gotta honor our past selves.
I love it. Stay true to yourself on that. And as I was listening, you mentioned a couple people that I just totally adore too, Amy Bender and Kevin Wilson. They are just two of my favorites as well. So kudos to you for getting blurbs from them. That's fantastic. Really cool. All right, everybody. Maggie, congratulations on Blob and on the upcoming 8 weeks away, or more less than that, I guess, huh? 4 weeks away, the new arrival. So this was fantastic. And Renee, thank you for your time in doing this. And everybody, make sure I put it in the link to buy Blob from Warwick's, but if you're not entitled to do that, just buy it from a local independent bookstore wherever you're at. So with that, I'm going to say goodnight to everybody.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Warwick. It's
Okay,
incredible.
bye you guys.
Bye.